Vanessa Cole, a powerful black CEO, was humiliated and violently assaulted in broad daylight by a cop who thought he could break her spirit. But what no one saw coming was how this moment would ignite a fierce fight against a corrupt system and expose secrets that could destroy an entire city. What happens next will shock. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. Vanessa Cole stepped off the plane in Savannah, Georgia, the warm southern sun greeting her like an old friend. At just 30 years old, she was already the CEO of Tech, one of the fastest rising defense technology firms in the country. But today she wanted something different. Not the sharp suits, flashing cameras, or polished speeches. Today, Vanessa wanted to feel the city beneath her feet, breathe in its history, and connect with a place that felt both familiar and strange. The cobblestone streets stretched before her, lined with towering oak trees, draped in Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. The faint sound of jazz floated down from a nearby street corner, blending with the hum of cars and laughter of children playing in the distance. It was a picture-perfecting southern afternoon, the kind of scene that photographers and tourists dreamed of capturing. Vanessa adjusted the collar of her light blue silk blouse and smoothed the fabric of her high-waisted black slacks. Her low heels clicked softly against the stone as she began her walk from the airport to the hotel. She moved with a quiet confidence, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that made it impossible to ignore her presence. Her natural curls framed her face like a crown, her skin glowing in the golden sunlight. But beneath that calm exterior, Vanessa's mind churned. She was proud of how far she'd come, a young black woman leading a company that supplied cybersecurity infrastructure to top military clients. She had negotiated with generals twice her age, faced boardrooms filled with doubters, and shattered ceilings that many thought were unbreakable. Yet, in this moment, walking the streets of Savannah, she felt the invisible weight of something unspoken. There was a tension in the air, a quiet undercurrent beneath the city's beauty. Vanessa noticed the way some shopkeepers' smiles tightened when she passed by, the way couples on park benches exchanged glances that lingered a little too long. It wasn't overt, but it was there, a reminder that no matter her titles or accomplishments, she was still seen differently here. She recalled growing up in Baltimore, learning to read the room, to sense when she was welcome and when she wasn't. Savannah's charm was undeniable. But Vanessa knew that beneath its historic facades lay stories of exclusion and pain. It was a place still wrestling with its past, and sometimes that past followed you in the most unexpected ways. Still, Vanessa refused to let it shake her. She was here on business, representing her company and her people with grace and determination. A few sideways glances weren't going to stop her from walking tall. Choosing to leave her hotel for a walk alone was Vanessa's way of staying grounded. No entourage, no security detail, just her and the city. As she strolled down Abercorn Street, the sun cast long shadows on the sidewalks, and the hum of life carried on around her. But with each step, the subtle signs of exclusion grew harder to ignore. A boutique with gleaming windows caught her eye. It was a place that had long ago torn down its whites-only signs, yet the air still held the residue of what once was. As Vanessa approached, a man in a tailor suit held the door open for a white couple, but let it swing shut in her face. She paused, a flash of irritation crossing her mind, but then she simply opened the door herself and walked in with a quiet. She saw the way a group of older couples sitting outside a nearby cafe stopped their conversation as she walked by, their smiles polite but strained. A cyclist slowed down just enough to look at her a little too long, his gaze narrowing as if trying to assess if she belonged in this neighborhood. Vanessa had been here before, in cities and towns where her presence was a challenge, where every step was measured, every breath taken under scrutiny. She let the discomfort wash over her, but didn't let it root. Instead, she reflected on the battles she'd fought in corporate boardrooms, the dismissive remarks, the underestimation, the need to prove herself repeatedly. Savannah was just another room, and she was ready to claim her space. Passing a restaurant with iron balconies and weathered bricks, Vanessa took a deep breath. The city was beautiful, the moss hanging from trees, the intricate ironwork, the distant sound of blues music. But beauty could be a mask. She understood that some things in Savannah had not changed as much as the postcard suggested. Yet, Vanessa's steps never falter. She was here for a summit, to discuss national security, to build partnerships that could shape the future. She had a job to do, and no glance, no whisper, no cold shoulder would deter her. After a few blocks, Vanessa spotted the Savannah Bean, a small, local cafe with a shaded patio beneath a sprawling oak. The kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the clatter of cups and soft murmur of conversation created a comforting hum. She stepped inside, greeting the cashier with a polite nod, and ordered a large, sweet tea, extra ice, a rare indulgence on a busy day. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged, with glasses perched on the end of her nose, gave Vanessa a brief, stiff smile before returning to her work. Vanessa paid in cash, left a generous tip, and stepped out to the patio, settling onto a worn wooden bench under the tree's shade. She took a slow sip of the sweet tea, the cold sweetness cutting through the rising warmth of the afternoon. For a brief moment, Vanessa allowed herself to relax, to take in the sounds around her. The distant laughter of children, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint jazz notes drifting down the street. She glanced at her phone, noting the time. There were still a few hours before her evening meetings, a few hours to breathe. But even in this peaceful moment, the unease lingered just beneath the surface. Across the street, in the shadow of a large oak, a patrol car sat idling. Inside, Officer Blake Tanner watched. Tanner was a man shaped by the city he served, but also by its darker legacies. His family had been part of Savannah's police force for generations. His grandfather was a respected officer back in the day, a legacy that gave Tanner an unspoken immunity. He was known around town for his quick temper and his willingness to bend rules, the kind of cop who saw his badge as a license to control, to intimidate. As Vanessa sipped her tea, Tanner's eyes locked on her. To him, she wasn't just a visitor. She was a target, someone who didn't belong, someone who needed to be reminded of her place. He watched as she moved with quiet dignity, unaware that the moment she walked into his sight, her life was about to change forever. The patrol car's engine hummed low as Tanner cracked his knuckles, a silent signal of the storm brewing ahead. The peaceful afternoon had shattered, and Savannah was about to reveal its true face. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Forsyth Park as Officer Blake Tanner sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, fingers drumming restlessly on the steering wheel. His eyes never left Vanessa Cole, the woman whose quiet confidence had already set his temper ablaze. He fumbled with his radio, a plan forming in his mind. Dispatch, Unit 12. Possible suspect matching description of recent theft at Magnolia Boutique. Female, mid-30s, blue blouse, walking near Forsyth Park. Tanner spoke into the microphone, his voice cold and deliberate. He knew the report was false, there had been no theft. But this was his justification, his excuse to stop Vanessa and remind her where she belonged. Across the street, Vanessa sipped the last of her sweet tea, oblivious to the conversation unfolding behind her. The calm she'd held moments ago began to crack as Tanner's cruiser rolled forward, its engine rumbling low. The car stopped a few feet ahead of her path, blocking the way. Vanessa set down her empty cup and stood, smoothing the creases of her blouse. She met Tanner's gaze as he stepped out, his posture rigid, jaw clenched. There was a dangerous edge to him, the kind that warned of trouble. "Hey, you," Tanner called, voice loud and authority. "I need you to stop right there." Vanessa's heart rate quickened, but her expression remained composed. She knew this moment, the familiar dance of power and suspicion. She turned slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem, officer?" Tanner stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt. "There's been a report of theft. You fit the description. I need to see some." Vanessa swallowed the rising irritation. "I'm not aware of any theft, officer." And I'm not required to present ID unless you have reasonable suspicion. Her tone was measured, every word chosen to de-escalate, but firm enough to hold her ground. The tension thickened. Tanner's eyes narrowed, frustration flashing behind them. You can hand over your ID, or we can make this difficult. Vanessa reached slowly into her purse and pulled out her government-issued ID badge. Not just any card, but one marking her as CEO of Coltech, a federal defense contractor. She held it up clearly. This is my identification. Tanner barely glanced at the badge, smirking as if she'd shown him a toy. I asked for a state-issued ID, he snapped. The dismissal was a slap, a denial of her identity and status. Vanessa's chest tightened. She knew this wasn't about identification, it was about control. She took a breath. Steadying herself, officer, you need probable cause. To demand my ID. I'm here on official business, and I haven't committed any crime. Tanner's jaw tensed. You don't give me orders, he growled. His voice dropped low, venomous. Hands where I can see them. Vanessa's heart pounded in her ears, but her resolve remained unbroken. She raised her hands slowly, deliberately, signaling compliance, but refusing submission. Nearby, Officer Cindy Briggs watched from the cruiser, unease creasing her brow. She opened the door slightly, calling out, Blake, come on, let's clear this and move on. But Tanner ignored her, fixated on Vanessa, like a predator stalking its prey. Vanessa's mind raced as Tanner's words cut through the quiet afternoon air. She knew this wasn't about a simple ID check. It was a power play, an attempt to assert control in a way that had nothing to do with law or justice. She met his demand with steady resolve. Officer Tanner, she said deliberately, voice calm but resolute. I'm here on federal business representing Coltech. These credentials, she lifted her government-issued badge carefully so everyone could see. Verify that I will not be humiliated or questioned without cause. Tanner's gaze hardened, his frustration simmering beneath his strict facade. I asked for your state ID, ma'am. This isn't about your job title. It's about following the law. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She had faced condescension and prejudice many times before, in boardrooms, meetings, even at the highest levels of government, but this was different. This was public, raw, and personal. You're mistaken if you think your badge gives you the right to dismiss my credentials, Vanessa replied evenly. Unless you have reasonable suspicion of a crime, you can't demand my ID. The crowd watching grew silent, sensing the escalation. Bystanders exchanged worried glances, some raising their phones discreetly, anticipating trouble. Tanner stepped closer, his presence looming like a threat. This isn't a negotiation. Hand over your ID or I'll have to detain you. Vanessa's eyes flicked around. She weighed her options carefully. She could comply, risk being caught in a spiral of abuse, or she could stand her ground and risk the consequences. She knew the dangers of pushing back, but her integrity left her no choice. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her purse, pulling out her state-issued ID card. Her movements were calm, showing she was not a threat. Here, I'm cooperating, but this is not an admission of guilt. Tanner snatched the card with impatience, barely glancing at it before tossing it aside as if it were worthless. You're wasting my time. You don't get to talk back. Vanessa's breath hitched, but she held her posture. This is harassment. I am prepared to file a formal complaint. The defiance in her voice was met with a sharp sneer from Tanner. Keep talking like that, and I'll show you how quickly this can end with cuffs. His hand shot out faster than Vanessa could react. He grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back with sudden, brutal force. Pain seared through her shoulder as her body was yanked forward. Gasp rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's calm shattered for a split second, but she refused to cry out. Her mind raced, trying to stay centered amid the chaos. You're making this worse for yourself, Tanner hissed in her ear. his breath hot and threatening. "Don't test me." Vanessa felt the sting of humiliation burn through her veins, but kept her voice low, steady, and clear. "I'm not resisting. You're abusing your power." The tight grip on her wrist was relentless as Tanner shoved her against the hood of the patrol car. The metal was scorching, pressing into her chest, restricting her breath. She heard the murmurs grow louder, some confused, others enraged. And then, the unthinkable. Tanner ripped her blouse violently down the middle. The sound of fabric tearing echoed in the air. Her undergarments were exposed in full view of the stunned crowd. Shock and outrage ignited like wildfire. Vanessa's cheeks flushed deep crimson, but she forced herself not to flinch. Her dignity, battered though it was, burned brighter than the humiliation. She struggled to pull the torn fabric together, refusing to let this moment define her. The crowd was frozen for a heartbeat, before erupting into a cacophony of shouts. "What the hell are you doing?" someone yelled. Another voice called out, "Let her go!" From the cruiser, Officer Cindy Briggs emerged, her face tight with disbelief and frustration. Her voice was urgent but restrained. "Blake, stop this right now! There's no cause for this!" But Tanner was deaf to reason. His face twisted into something monstrous, part rage, part entitlement. His grip didn't loosen. Instead, he pressed Vanessa harder against the car's hood, his control absolute in that moment. Cindy's hands reached for his shoulder, attempting to pull him away. "This isn't right. You're going to ruin everything." For a moment, the internal struggle within the police force became visible, between officers who wanted to do what was right and those caught in the grip of toxic power. But Tanner shrugged off her intervention with chilling contempt. "Suspect is resisting arrest," he barked into his radio, twisting the narrative, deliberately ignoring the glaring truth unfolding before everyone's eyes. Vanessa's voice cut through the chaos, clear and unwavering. "I am Vanessa Cole. I am the CEO of Coltech, a federal defense contractor. I am here on official government business." The crowd fell silent. Her words rippled through them like a wave, shifting the energy in the park. Some bystanders lowered their phones in shock. Cindy's own mouth opened, disbelief flickering across her face. But Tanner only laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that sent chills through Vanessa's spine. "Yeah, and I'm the president," he sneered mockingly. The crowd recoiled, anger rising. The air thickened with outrage. Phones raised again, recording every brutal moment. What had begun as a private assault now became a public reckoning. The bystanders were no longer silent witnesses. They were allies. Vanessa straightened her spine, despite the humiliation and pain. The torn blouse and flushed cheeks could not mask the fire in her eyes. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Cindy, standing between Tanner and the growing crowd, shouted, "You're out of control." Her voice was shaking but resolute. "Back off, Blake." But Tanner's stubbornness refused to yield. The power he wielded had been unchecked for too long, and in this moment, he fought to hold on to it, unaware that the tide was turning against him. The crowd surged forward, phones documenting, voices rising in protest. The walls of silence that had protected abuse for years were crumbling. Vanessa's defiance ignited a spark that would grow into a blazing call for justice. The moment Blake Tanner's hands ripped through Vanessa Cole's blouse, the air in Forsyth Park shifted. What had started as a quiet afternoon stroll had exploded into a scene of raw injustice, right there on the cobblestone streets of Savannah. People nearby stopped mid-step, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some gasped, others shouted, and many instinctively pulled out their phones. Among the crowd was Marcus, a young man who had been walking his dog just yards away. His hands trembled as he grabbed his phone, hitting record with shaking fingers. He knew instantly this was something no one could ignore. His screen captured everything: the officer's aggressive grip, the shocked expression on Vanessa's face, the torn fabric falling away, exposing more than anyone should ever see. Within minutes, Marcus uploaded the video to multiple social media platforms, The clip spread like wildfire, fueled by outrage and disbelief. Thousands of viewers shared and commented, their anger echoing across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags like Justice for Vanessa and Savannah Speaks exploded in popularity, trending not only locally but nationwide. Social media influencers picked up the story next. Their posts were filled with heartfelt calls to action, urging followers to stand with Vanessa, to demand accountability from the Savannah Police Department. Activists amplified the video's reach, weaving it into ongoing conversations about systemic racism, police brutality, and the unique struggles Black women face in America. The video's virality transformed Vanessa overnight. She was no longer just a CEO on a business trip. She became a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the fight against deeply ingrained injustice. Every share, every retweet added fuel to a growing movement demanding change. News outlets scrambled to report. Local stations aired the footage repeatedly, framing the incident as emblematic of broader racial tensions simmering beneath Savannah's picturesque surface. National networks took notice, inviting experts to discuss the systemic patterns behind such incidents, dissecting the abuse of power and the urgent need for reform. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens took to the streets. Groups organized rallies, candlelight vigils, and community forums. The story that began with one woman's walk through a city had ignited a powerful spark, awakening long-held frustrations and a collective determination to confront inequality. Vanessa's name was whispered in every corner of Savannah, her courage inspiring those who had long felt silenced. In just a few short hours, what seemed like a private moment of humiliation had become a public outcry that would ripple through the city and beyond. As the video of Vanessa's assault swept across social media, the waves of public outcry began to crash hard against the walls of Savannah floor. People from all walks of life flooded comment sections, message boards, and community forums, each voice adding layers to a growing chorus of shock, disbelief, and demand for justice. Marilyn, a local school teacher, watched the footage over and over. She remembered her own experiences as a Black woman, navigating subtle prejudices daily. "It's not just Vanessa," she told a friend. "It's all of us. This is the reality we live with." Her words echoed thousands of others who finally saw their silent struggles reflected in the national spotlight. Community members who witnessed the confrontation stepped forward, their voices trembling with anger and sorrow. James, a retired veteran who had been passing through the park that afternoon, described how the moment felt like watching a line being crossed, a line that should never be crossed. Others spoke of the humiliation Vanessa endured, the raw injustice of the attack. Social media became a platform for collective healing and solidarity. Black women shared their own stories of harassment and disrespect by law enforcement, weaving a tapestry of resilience and resistance. Vanessa's ordeal illuminated a systemic pattern often overlooked: the unique and targeted vulnerabilities Black women face in encounters with the police. Vanessa herself quickly emerged as a symbol, her composed yet defiant stance inspiring countless others to speak out. Despite the trauma, she remained steadfast, her courage fueling a movement that refused to be ignored. Messages poured in from across the country, from people thanking her for her bravery, to others sharing their own painful encounters, to calls for sweeping change. The emotional weight of the incident gripped the community tightly. Vigils were held in parks, churches, and city squares, where tears mingled with chants for justice. The collective sorrow transformed into resolve, a determination that Vanessa's story would not be just another forgotten headline, but a catalyst for real, lasting reform. As the video of Vanessa Cole's public assault erupted across social media, it rapidly transcended the digital realm and ignited a firestorm in mainstream media. Local news stations in Savannah were among the first to seize the story, running repeated broadcasts of the footage. Anchors struggled to contain their disbelief as the raw video showed an unarmed woman, a high solicitor sworn to protect the community. The impact was immediate and profound. Journalists on the ground interviewed stunned witnesses, whose voices trembled with a mixture of outrage and sorrow. They recounted how the moment had shattered the calm afternoon, and how the crowd around the park had shifted from curious bystanders to fierce advocates for justice within minutes. The Savannah Police Department's initial silence only intensified public frustration and speculation. City officials scrambled behind closed doors to craft a response, but the damage was already done. In the court of public opinion, the video spoke volume, and the community demanded answers. Within 24 hours, national news outlets had picked up the story. Cable networks and major newspapers devoted airtime and column inches to Vanessa's case, framing it as a glaring example of entrenched racial injustice and abuse of power in American law enforcement. The narrative quickly evolved from a local incident to a national reckoning. Experts were invited to dissect the case on primetime panels and morning shows. Legal analysts meticulously explained the rights Vanessa asserted during the confrontation. The right to not be unlawfully stopped, the right to challenge police misconduct, and highlighted how those rights were brazenly violated. Civil rights lawyers emphasized the broader implications for police accountability and the urgent need for reform in departments nationwide. Sociologists and historians contextualized Vanessa's experience within the long, painful legacy of systemic racism that has disproportionately impacted Black communities. They spotlighted how Black women, in particular, have often been overlooked in public discourse on police violence despite facing unique vulnerabilities at the intersection of race and gender. Simultaneously, investigative journalists began digging into the Savannah Police Department's past. Stories surfaced about prior complaints against Officer Blake, recounts of aggression, racial profiling, and unpunished misconduct. The department's pattern of protecting problematic officers while dismissing community concerns became a focal point of criticism. The media coverage galvanized a surge of public activism. Viewers and readers flooded social media and news websites with calls for justice, urging officials to act decisively. Opinion pieces and editorials demanded transparency and systemic overhaul, arguing that Vanessa's assault was symptomatic of deeper institutional failures. Throughout the coverage, Vanessa's own statement struck a powerful chord. Calm, composed, yet undeniably fierce, her public words articulated a vision of accountability and hope. She refused to be reduced to a victim, instead embracing the role of a leader who demanded real change. Her presence challenged stereotypes and inspired a national conversation about dignity, power, and resistance. As reporters broadcast live from Savannah, the city found itself under an intense spotlight. Officials faced mounting pressure to respond not just to one incident, but to decades of unresolved grievances and community distrust. The media's relentless scrutiny made it impossible to ignore the call for reform. Podcasts and online forums buzzed with debate. Journalists and activists collaborated, amplifying voices from the grassroots and unearthing more stories of injustice. Savannah's police department was no longer insulated. It was at the center of a broad movement demanding transformation. This media storm marked a pivotal turning point. What began as a single act of violence had evolved into a powerful catalyst for change, exposing cracks in the system and rallying a community and a nation behind the fight for justice. Vanessa Cole's story had become more than news. It had become a movement. The moment the video of Officer Blake Tanner's assault on Vanessa Cole went viral, the Savannah Police Department faced an immediate and overwhelming public backlash. Pressure mounted from every direction. The city's residents, national civil rights organizations, and a media hungry for answers. The department quickly announced that Tanner and his partner, Officer Cindy Briggs, were suspended pending a formal investigation. It was a necessary move, a clear message to the public that the department was taking the incident seriously. Yet behind the scenes, the mood was far more complicated and tense. Inside the department, the suspension was met with a mixture of relief, anger, and apprehension. For many officers, Tanner was not just a colleague, but a symbol of the department's long culture. Some felt betrayed by the public outrage and feared that the video had painted the entire force in a negative light. Others, more quietly, began to question what the incident revealed about systemic issues that had been ignored for too long. The police union, a powerful and influential entity within Savannah's law enforcement landscape, moved swiftly. Union leaders began mobilizing their network of supporters, drafting statements aimed at defending Tanner's character. They painted the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding, emphasizing Tanner's stressful workload and commitment to keeping Savannah safe. They warned against rushing to judgment and called for due process. But many saw these tactics as a thinly veiled attempt to protect one of their own at any cost. The union's pushback didn't stop at public statements. Behind closed doors, negotiations and pressure campaigns were underway with city officials, who themselves were suddenly caught in a political storm. The mayor's office and city council scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, while also seeking to manage the potential fallout in upcoming elections. Public relations teams within City Hall worked around the clock, crafting messages about transparency and reform, hoping to quell the growing unrest without promising anything concrete. Meanwhile, community activists were skeptical of any promises that came from the department or city leaders. Years of broken trust had taught them to expect little. They demanded real accountability, not just symbolic gestures. Public meetings filled quickly, residents sharing stories of police misconduct and calling for sweeping reforms. Vanessa, at the center of this maelstrom, remained focused. The suspension of the officers was only the beginning. She understood the depth of resistance she faced, not just from Tanner and his supporters, but from an institution that had long shielded itself from scrutiny. But her resolve was stronger than ever. Every call, every message of support, every rally gave her strength. She knew this investigation would be fraught with political maneuvering and attempts to minimize the truth, but she was ready to see it through, no matter how long it took. As the investigation unfolded, the department's internal dynamics became clearer. Officers who had remained silent for years now found themselves forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Some whispered about the old ways fading, others warned of how entrenched interests would fight back fiercely. The culture of silence and complicity that had protected officers like Tanner was beginning to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. But how deep those cracks ran was yet to be seen. Amid the swirling controversy, the department made a pivotal decision by appointing Captain Samuel Walker to oversee the investigation and lead the department's response. Walker was a seasoned, high-ranking officer and one of the few black captains in the force. His reputation as a principled and pragmatic leader preceded him. Known for his steady hand and willingness to confront difficult issues, Walker had long advocated quietly for change within the department. Walker's introduction was met with guarded optimism from the community. Many saw him as a potential ally who understood both the pressures of policing and the pain of systemic injustice. Privately, Walker carried the heavy burden of years spent navigating the complex realities of law enforcement in a city where racial tensions simmered just beneath the surface. In a candid conversation with Vanessa, Walker acknowledged the deep-rooted problems that allowed officers like Tanner to act with impunity. He admitted that the department had long turned a blind eye to complaints, creating a culture where abuse went unchecked. "It's not just one man," he said quietly. "It's a system built to protect itself, and breaking that cycle won't be easy." Despite the challenges, Walker made a clear commitment to support Vanessa's quest for justice. He worked closely with her legal team, sharing internal documents and promising transparency where possible. His presence added a new layer of credibility to the growing movement for accountability. Walker's leadership also brought internal shifts. He convened meetings with other department leaders, pushing for swift action on complaints and greater oversight. While some resisted, fearing exposure or political fallout, Walker's steady insistence on integrity began to ripple through the force. But Walker understood the tightrope he walked. Supporting Vanessa and pursuing reform risked alienating powerful interests within the department and city government. He was aware of the political games at play and the potential personal cost, yet he pressed forward, motivated by the belief that the department could and must change. For Vanessa, Walker's support was invaluable. His understanding of the system's complexities and willingness to confront them gave her hope that this fight was not hers alone. Together, they strategized how to keep the public informed, and ensure the investigation maintained momentum, knowing full well the opposition they faced. As the investigation gained traction, Vanessa embraced the spotlight with a clear purpose. From the outset, she was determined not to be cast simply as a victim. Instead, she positioned herself as a leader demanding justice, not only for herself, but for the countless others who had suffered similar abuses in silence. Vanessa appeared on television interviews, participated in panel discussions, and spoke at community forums. Her tone was measured but passionate, emphasizing systemic problems rather than personal grievance. She carefully navigated the media landscape, understanding the power of narrative and the importance of framing the story as a call for reform. Her legal team worked alongside civil rights organizations to build a comprehensive case, coordinating messaging and leveraging their networks to maintain pressure on the department and city officials. The growing coalition provided Vanessa with a powerful support system, helping her withstand the increasing scrutiny and attack. But with visibility came backlash. The police union intensified its efforts to discredit Vanessa. Smear campaigns emerged on social media, attempting to portray her as opportunistic or politically motivated. False rumors circulated about her character and intentions, aimed at undermining her credibility and fracturing her support base. Threats and intimidation tactics began to surface, targeting Vanessa and those close to her. Anonymous messages, veiled warnings, and suspicious activity around her home and office served as chilling reminders of the risks involved. Yet Vanessa remained unshaken, drawing strength from the solidarity around her and the clarity of her mission. Community groups mobilized as well, organizing protests, vigils, and educational forums. The incident had ignited a fire that spread beyond the initial outrage, sparking conversations about racial profiling, police reform, and the broader societal inequities that had allowed such abuses to persist. City officials, sensing the growing momentum, found themselves increasingly on the defensive. Public pressure forced some to take tentative steps toward reform, but many remained hesitant, wary of upsetting powerful local interests. The battle lines were drawn, and it was clear that the road ahead would be long and arduous. For Vanessa, the journey was just beginning. The institutional reckoning had started, but systemic change required sustained effort. She was prepared for the fight, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever, not just for herself, but for a community demanding justice and dignity. The filing of federal assault and civil rights violation charges against Officer Blake Tanner marked a turning point in the case. The Department of Justice had stepped in, signaling that this was more than a local dispute, it was a matter of national concern. The weight of the charges reverberated through Savannah and beyond, igniting a mix of hope and tension among the community. News outlets quickly picked up the story, and the preliminary hearings became a magnet for media attention. Reporters filled the courthouse, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward as journalists clamored for updates. The air buzzed with anticipation and nerves as the public awaited the courtroom drama that would unfold. Vanessa Cole arrived for the hearings surrounded by her legal team and a small group of supporters. Her posture was composed, but there was a visible tension beneath her calm exterior. She understood the gravity of this moment, not just for herself, but for every person who had suffered under unchecked abuse of power. The courtroom was packed, a mix of journalists, community members, and legal observers, all watching closely. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation. Prosecutors outlined the charges, laying bare the allegations of assault and violations of civil rights. The evidence, including the now viral video and witness testimonies, was presented with clarity and force. It was a straightforward case on the surface, but everyone knew the undercurrents ran deeper. The defense team, representing Tanner, repeatedly mounted to address a Tanner attack. They painted a picture of a dedicated officer overwhelmed by the pressures of his job. They argued that Tanner's actions, while regrettable, stemmed from stress and not malicious intent. Sympathy was sought by humanizing Tanner as a man burdened by the weight of protecting his city. The defense's tactic was clear: diminish the severity of the charges by shifting focus to Tanner's Despite the defense's efforts, the courtroom remained charged with emotion. For many in the public gallery, the hearing was not just about the facts, but a symbol of the ongoing fight against systemic injustice. Vanessa's legal team used this opening to remind the court of the broader context, how this incident reflected a pattern of racial profiling and abuse that demanded accountability. The hearing concluded with a reminder that the road ahead would be long. The judge emphasized the importance of due process, but the public's eyes were fixed on Vanessa and the implications of this case for law enforcement reform nationwide. Outside, the city held its breath, awaiting the next chapter in this unfolding battle for justice. The days leading up to Vanessa's testimony were some of the most emotionally taxing of her life. Each morning, she awoke to the weight of what lay ahead: the looming courtroom, the questions she would face, the memories she would have to revisit in front of strangers. Yet beneath the heavy cloak of anxiety was a steady fire of determination. She was not just fighting for herself, but for every voice that had been silenced by injustice. Vanessa's legal team worked tirelessly alongside her, running through the finer details of her account again and again. They helped her prepare for every possible line of questioning, coaching her to maintain clarity, calm, and conviction. It wasn't just about recounting facts, it was about conveying the deep human truth behind those facts. Every pause, every inflection, every carefully chosen word mattered. They practiced how to face the defense's attempts to twist her story and undermine her credibility, reminding Vanessa that the truth was her strongest weapon. Despite the rigorous preparation, Vanessa allowed herself moments of vulnerability. In the quiet sanctuary of her hotel room, she often found herself staring out the window, her thoughts drifting back to the day of the incident. The shock of Tanner's unwarranted aggression, the humiliation of having her blouse torn, and the cold, dismissive attitude he showed, it all played on her mind like a relentless tide. But she refused to let those memories break her spirit. Support came in waves. Colleagues from Colte, the company she had built from the ground up, sent messages of encouragement and solidarity. FBI friends, some of whom had faced their own battles with systemic bias, reached out to offer support and practical advice. Her legal team became her anchor, and close friends became her refuge. The collective strength of these connections reminded her that she was not alone in this fight. On the morning of her testimony, Vanessa chose her attire with care. She wanted to project not just professionalism, but resilience. Her sleek, dark suit was a symbol of control both over her image and the narrative she was about to shape. As she walked into the courthouse, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, though inside her heart pounded with the intensity of the moment. This was more than a trial. It was a declaration that she would no longer be invisible or dismissed. Sitting in the waiting room before the proceedings began, Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. She centered herself, drawing strength from the knowledge that her voice could inspire change beyond the courtroom walls. The weight of expectations from supporters, the media, and the countless people watching around the country pressed down, but she welcomed it. She was ready to stand tall. The courtroom was a stage where the battle for justice would unfold, and from the very first moments, the atmosphere was electric. Prosecutors opened with a powerful statement that framed the case as a critical test of accountability in law enforcement. They detailed the assault on Vanessa Cole not just as an isolated event, but as emblematic of systemic abuse and racial profiling that had long plagued communities of color. They presented the viral video, which had been viewed millions of times, as incontrovertible evidence of Tanner's misconduct. Witnesses were introduced, ready to attest to the facts and to the character of Vanessa. A woman unjustly targeted and humiliated, the tone was unwavering, making clear that this case was about more than punishment. It was about reform and justice. The defense team moved quickly to counter. They painted Tanner as a man overwhelmed by the stresses of his job, a dedicated officer who had simply made a grave mistake. They sought to humanize him, offering glimpses into the pressures he faced daily and attempting to evoke sympathy from the jury. Their goal was to frame Tanner's actions as unintentional, the product of an overburdened system rather than malicious intent. They argued for leniency and questioned Vanessa's motives, aiming to create doubt. Outside, the city's response was loud and visible. A large crowd gathered, some holding signs, demanding justice for Vanessa and end police brutality. The air buzzed with chants and speeches, a communal expression of solidarity and outrage. The crowd was a mosaic of ages, races, and background. People who had seen too many stories like Vanessa's and refused to let this one be ignored. Amidst the support, there were also undercurrents of fear. Vanessa was approached by some who offered encouragement, but also warned her of the danger she faced. Threats, both subtle and overt, had already begun to surface. Yet these warnings only steeled her resolve. This wasn't a fight she had chosen lightly, but it was one she would see through no matter the cost. The community vigil became a symbol of hope and resistance, with people sharing their own stories of injustice and raising their voices to demand change. Local leaders, activists, and everyday citizens spoke passionately, reminding everyone that Vanessa's fight was part of a larger movement for accountability. Back inside the courthouse, Vanessa found strength in knowing that outside, her story was resonating and rallying support. The courtroom proceedings were more than legal formalities. They were a battleground for truth. She braced herself for the challenges ahead, ready to face not only the defense's strategies, but also the emotional toll of reliving the trauma under the public eye. The day closed with a sense of cautious optimism. While the defense fought hard to protect their client, the weight of evidence and public scrutiny was undeniable. Vanessa's courage had ignited a spark, and the city was beginning to awaken to the realities it could no longer ignore. The fight for justice was far from over, but the momentum was unmistakably shifting. The courtroom held its breath as Vanessa Cole was called to the stand. She rose with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her gaze steady. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, the woman who had become a symbol of courage and resilience amid the chaos that had shaken Savannah. The judge gave a solemn nod, signaling her to begin. Vanessa took a deep breath, allowing a moment for the weight of the room to settle around her. Then she began, her voice calm but resonant, each word deliberate and powerful. She described the day that had started like any other, walking through the historic city streets, breathing in the charm of the oak trees and cobblestone, soaking in the warm sunlight and distant jazz that painted the city's vibrant atmosphere. But beneath the surface, she explained, the day quickly shifted from ordinary to harrowing. She recounted the mounting tension she felt, the subtle glances that lingered too long, the doors closing just as she approached, the tightening smiles that barely concealed suspicion. Vanessa knew this dance well, the silent language of exclusion and prejudice she had encountered time and again throughout her life. Then came the moment when Officer Blake Tanner's cruiser pulled up alongside her. She detailed how Tanner's gaze turned from casual observation to focused intent, a predator zeroing in on prey. Vanessa described the initial approach, the false pretext about a theft, and how she kept her composure despite the growing hostility. Her voice carried the courtroom through the entire encounter, the dismissive demands for ID, the blatant disregard for her government credentials, and the dangerous escalation that followed. Vanessa spoke plainly but vividly about how Tanner forcibly grabbed her arm, yanking it behind her back, twisting her body until she was pressed hard against the patrol car's cold metal hood. The most searing part of her testimony was when she described the moment Tanner ripped her blouse, exposing her in front of the gathering crowd. Vanessa's voice faltered briefly, but she steadied herself, channeling every ounce of strength to reclaim that moment, to tell it on her terms. The jury sat spellbound, some blinking away tears, others visibly disturbed by the cruelty laid bare before them. Spectators whispered in hushed tones, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. Vanessa's testimony was no longer just a recounting of facts. It was a raw, unvarnished human story of pain, injustice, and defiance. Throughout, Vanessa maintained eye contact with the jurors, communicating without words the dignity she refused to surrender. She spoke as a Black woman who had faced systemic bias throughout her life, boardrooms, negotiations, and now the streets of Savannah. She wasn't just telling her story, she was demanding the justice that so many before her had been denied. When her testimony concluded, an almost reverential silence lingered. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the gravity of what had been shared. Vanessa stepped down from the stand, composed and resolute, knowing the battle had only just begun, but feeling a newfound strength coursing through her veins. With Vanessa's testimony still echoing in the courtroom, the prosecution moved forward with a steady and unrelenting presentation of evidence. The room darkened as the body camera footage from Tanner's patrol vehicle was played on the large screen at the front. The grainy video showed everything: the slow, deliberate approach, Tanner's escalating aggression, and the moment of violent contact. The jury watched in stunned silence as Tanner grabbed Vanessa's arm, yanked her around, and shoved her onto the patrol car's hood. The moment he tore her blouse was captured in stark detail, the image sparking audible gasps from the gallery. Several spectators raised their phones, capturing the footage to preserve this damning evidence. Next came the bystander video. Raw, unedited clips recorded by witnesses who had sensed something wrong unfolding before their eyes. Different perspectives from the street, close-ups of Tanner's aggressive grip, the crowd's shocked reactions, and Vanessa's unwavering strength all served to corroborate her testimony. The combination of these videos left little doubt about the truth of what had transpired. Then the prosecution introduced internal police reports, detailing Tanner's long history of complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation tactics. These reports revealed a disturbing pattern of systemic negligence, and a culture painted a portrait of a man who had operated with impunity, shielded by colleagues, and a department unwilling to confront its own failings. The defense attorney attempted to cast doubt on the evidence, claiming the videos could be edited and that Tanner was an overworked officer reacting under stress. They sought to humanize Tanner, arguing his actions were mistakes, not malice. But the carefully compiled evidence and expert testimonies dismantled these defenses. Experts in law enforcement and civil rights took the stand, explaining the broader systemic issues underscored by this case. They described how implicit bias and institutional inertia allowed abuses to flourish, reinforcing a culture where Black women like Vanessa were disproportionately targeted and mistreated. Throughout the evidence presentation, the jury remained engaged, visibly affected by the mounting proof. The defense's attempts to downplay the severity faltered against the overwhelming truth. The narrative was clear. Vanessa had been the victim of an egregious abuse of power, and justice demanded accountability. After the prosecution rested, the judge dismissed the jury for deliberation. The jurors filed out quietly, the weight of their responsibility evident in their expressions. Outside the courtroom, a crowd of supporters, journalists, and activists waited with bated breath, hoping for justice. Inside the deliberation room, jurors reviewed the evidence carefully. The videos, Vanessa's testimony, the internal reports. They debated the facts, the credibility of witnesses, and the implications of their decision. Tensions ran high as hours stretched on, the quiet deliberations punctuated by whispered discussions and thoughtful glances. Finally, the jury re-entered the courtroom. The judge called the court to order, and the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On all counts, the foreperson announced, "We find the defendant, Officer Blake Tanner, guilty." A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. Some spectators wiped away tears, others nodded in relief, and a few broke into quiet applause. Vanessa's expression remained composed, but radiant with quiet triumph, her dignity and resolve rewarded by the truth. The judge proceeded with sentencing, his voice grave and authoritative. He condemned Tanner's actions, emphasizing the importance of accountability and the need to restore public trust. The sentence was severe: a lengthy prison term, immediate suspension of his police license, and mandated bias training and community service. As Tanner was handcuffed and led from the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. The victory felt monumental, a rare and profound moment of justice served. Vanessa stood tall, absorbing the moment while preparing mentally for the ongoing fight. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa addressed the gathered press and supporters. Her voice was steady, filled with the gravity of the moment, but also a spark of hope. She dedicated the verdict to all those who had suffered in silence, and called for systemic change, vigilance, and continued activism. This moment marked a turning point, not an end. Vanessa knew the path ahead was long, but the jury's decision had sent a powerful message. Abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. She was ready to lead the charge toward a future where dignity and justice were not privileges, but rights guaranteed to all. In the weeks following the verdict, Savannah began to stir with a renewed sense of hope and determination. Vanessa Cole, once simply a visitor to this city, had become a beacon of resilience and strength, a voice for those who had long been silenced. She embraced this new role with a humility that only deepened her impact. Vanessa traveled across the city, attending community forums and healing gatherings that brought together people from every corner of Savannah's diverse neighborhoods. These were not staged events, nor mere performances for the media. They were raw, honest spaces, where pain was acknowledged and voices were finally heard. She sat with survivors of police abuse, listened to mothers whose children had been lost or broken by systemic violence, and met with young activists burning with the fire of change. At each forum, Vanessa shared her own story, not as a celebrity or a CEO, but as a Black woman who had faced public humiliation and violence at the hands of those sworn to protect. Her words carried the weight of personal experience, but were tempered with the clarity of her mission: to transform trauma into collective healing and to build a foundation for justice that would outlast any one person. The gatherings were marked by moments of powerful vulnerability. Tears flowed freely as individuals recounted their own encounters with racism, fear, and injustice. But alongside the tears came stories of courage, resilience, and survival. Vanessa made it clear that healing was not about forgiving or forgiving too quickly, but about reclaiming dignity and agency over their own lives. One evening, at a packed community center, Vanessa stood at the front of a room buzzing with energy. She spoke about the importance of solidarity, the strength found in shared struggle, and the power of community to enact real change. "We are more than our pain," she said. "We are the authors of our own future. Together, we will rewrite the story of this city." Her message resonated deeply. Elders who had borne the brunt of decades of systemic racism nodded solemnly. Youth activists felt their spirits lift with a renewed sense of purpose, and even those who had felt powerless before began to find their voices. The forums became a vital space where healing and hope intertwine, where the community began to stitch its wounds with threads of solidarity. Inspired by the groundswell of support and the urgent need for structural change, Vanessa took a bold step. The initiative's mission was clear: to provide free, expert legal representation to those who had suffered from police misconduct, to offer education about civil rights, and to create a support system that no survivor would have to face alone. Vanessa poured her resources into building a coalition of seasoned civil rights attorneys, passionate activists, and trusted community leaders. Together, they formed a powerful network committed to justice and reform. Vanessa's leadership was both strategic and deeply personal. She understood that the fight was bigger than one case or one city. It was about dismantling systemic racism and ensuring accountability at every level. The initiative prioritized accessibility. Legal clinics were held in neighborhoods where trust in the system had long been eroded, and services were tailored to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. Beyond litigation, the Cole Initiative launched educational campaigns. Workshops taught citizens their rights during police encounters, how to document abuse safely, and ways to advocate for policy change. Trauma-informed counseling and peer support groups were established to help survivors reclaim their sense of safety and dignity. The response was overwhelming. Volunteers flocked to the cause, and partnerships with national civil rights organizations strengthened the initiative's reach. Donations and grants allowed for rapid expansion, turning a fledgling effort into a formidable force. News of the initiative spread quickly, igniting similar movements in neighboring cities eager to join the fight against injustice. Through the Cole Initiative, Vanessa transformed her personal battle into a collective shield. It was no longer just about her story. It was about every person who had been marginalized, abused, or ignored by the system. The initiative became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of organized, community-led action. Vanessa knew that legal battles and community support alone could not end systemic abuse. Lasting change demanded transformation from within the very institutions that had enabled it. With this in mind, she engaged with city officials, police leadership, and policymakers to push for concrete reforms. Central to these efforts was the introduction of comprehensive police training focused on racial bias awareness and de-escalation tactics. Vanessa worked with experts to design curricula that addressed implicit biases and equipped officers with tools to manage confrontations without resorting to violence. These programs were mandatory, with ongoing assessments to ensure accountability. She also advocated for the creation of independent oversight bodies with the power to investigate misconduct impartially. Transparency measures, such as public reporting of complaints and disciplinary actions, were championed to restore community trust. Vanessa leveraged her growing platform to keep these issues in the spotlight, holding officials accountable through persistent advocacy and media engagement. The resistance was fierce. Police unions pushed back hard, politicians attempted to water down reforms, and some community members expressed skepticism born from years of broken promises. Yet Vanessa remained steadfast, navigating these challenges with a combination of diplomacy and unwavering resolve. Alongside policy work, Vanessa invested in mentorship as a pillar of the movement's future. She dedicated time to guiding young attorneys, activists, and community organizers, sharing not only tactical knowledge but also the resilience and courage required to face systemic injustice. Through seminars, personal coaching, and public speaking engagements, she cultivated a new generation of leaders ready to continue the fight. The mentorship extended beyond legal circles. Vanessa fostered collaborations with educators, faith leaders, and youth programs, embedding the movement in the fabric of Savannah's social landscape. Her vision was clear: create a legacy of empowerment that would sustain progress long after today's headlines faded. Slowly but surely, the city began to change. Police officers approached their duties with renewed sensitivity, community leaders united around common goals, and a culture of accountability took root. The Cole Initiative was no longer just an organization. It was a catalyst for a transformative movement. Vanessa stood at the center of it all, not as a lone hero but as part of a collective force, proved that courage, strategy, and community could challenge even the deepest-rooted systems of oppression. Savannah's future was still unwritten, but now it was filled with possibility, one forged by those who refused to be silent or broken. The moment Vanessa Cole's story exploded into the public consciousness, the backlash began. What started as whispers behind closed doors quickly evolved into organized political resistance. Police unions, city officials, and powerful local politicians sprang into action to undermine the movement and protect the interests that Vanessa had exposed. Within days of the viral incident, union leaders were meeting with influential city council members and senior police brass. They wielded considerable clout, appealing to fears about public safety and law enforcement morale. The message was clear: the sweeping reforms proposed by Vanessa and the Cole Initiative would destabilize the community's safety and unfairly punish officers like Blake Tanner, who they claimed were simply doing their jobs. These meetings were tense and strategic. Behind the polished rhetoric about protecting law enforcement dignity lay a fierce determination to preserve the existing power structure. Attempts to water down proposed training on racial bias, weaken oversight mechanisms, and stall transparency initiatives quickly surfaced. Political figures, wary of alienating a key voting bloc or losing financial backing, began hesitating to fully endorse the reforms. Simultaneously, a disinformation campaign gained momentum in local media and social networks. Anonymous sources emerged, leaking skewed versions of events to friendly journalists. Headlines questioned Vanessa's credibility, suggesting she was exploiting her personal experience for political gain or corporate advantage. Other stories claimed the entire confrontation was staged or exaggerated. The narrative shifted toward painting Vanessa as a divisive figure, rather than a victim demanding justice. These smear tactics sought to sow doubt within the community and fracture the coalition Vanessa had built. Social media threads became battlegrounds of heated debate, with trolls and bots amplifying false narratives. This digital warfare threatened to overshadow the truth and discourage public support. Despite the escalating attacks, Vanessa's resolve remained ironclad. She understood that resistance was inevitable when challenging entrenched systems, especially one as historically resistant to change as law enforcement. Rather than back down, she doubled down on transparency and truth. Her team began systematically addressing falsehoods with evidence, clear messaging, and unwavering commitment to the cause. Vanessa also reached out to local leaders, activists, and community groups, reinforcing the movement's unity. She reminded supporters that this pushback was a sign of progress, that they were striking at the heart of a system that feared accountability. The institutional forces could wield money and influence, but they could not suppress the power of a united community demanding justice. In these politically charged days, Vanessa discovered the true cost of her fight. The institutional pushback was relentless, yet it forged a deeper commitment within her and her allies. It was a crucible, testing their strength and resolve. The battle for reform was no longer just a personal story. It had become a defining moment for communities across the country. The relentless spotlight and mounting pressure began to exact a heavy personal toll on Vanessa Cole. Days blurred into nights, with little rest between media interviews, legal meetings, community engagements, and strategic planning sessions. The emotional weight of recounting her trauma repeatedly was exhausting, yet unavoidable. Sleepless nights became routine. Anxiety gnawed at the edges of her resolve, and moments of burnout crept in quietly but persistently. The cost of leadership was starkly clear. The physical and psychological strain threatened to overwhelm her, yet she refused to let it show. To the public, she remained a pillar of strength, a symbol of resilience. But behind closed doors, Vanessa wrestled with fatigue, fear, and moments of doubt. Threats, both overt and subtle, began infiltrating her life. Anonymous phone calls filled with silence or hostile messages rattled her nerves. Social media accounts bombarded her with hateful comments and warnings. Some threats felt chillingly specific, reminders that speaking out came with risks, not just to her reputation, but to her safety. Despite these challenges, Vanessa's support network became a crucial lifeline. Friends and family provided much-needed emotional refuge, grounding her amid the storm. Quiet conversations with those who understood the stakes reminded her she was not alone. Her FBI colleagues and legal team worked tirelessly to shield her from undue harm and offer constant support. Captain Samuel Walker and Officer Cindy Briggs were not just professional allies, but anchors of trust and encouragement. Their presence offered Vanessa a rare sense of security and camaraderie. In the rare moments she allowed herself to reflect, Vanessa recognized that the personal cost was inseparable from the broader fight for justice. Her pain and sacrifice were intertwined with the voices of countless others who had suffered silently under systemic abuse. This connection deepened her commitment. At times, the isolation felt suffocating. The weight of expectation, the constant scrutiny, and the unrelenting fight for reform threatened to erode her spirit. Yet, the very communities she championed, the survivors, the advocates, the everyday people rising up, infused her with renewed purpose. Each call of support, each message from a person inspired by her courage, became a beacon of hope. She carried their stories with her, transforming personal hardship into collective strength. In these moments, Vanessa reaffirmed her promise: she would not be silenced, no matter the cost. Recognizing that controlling the narrative was as vital as any legal battle, Vanessa and her team crafted a deliberate and multifaceted communication strategy. They knew that misinformation and distortion could erode public trust and stall momentum if left unchallenged. Vanessa took to every available platform with clarity and conviction. Carefully prepared interviews on local and national news allowed her to share her story authentically. addressing misconceptions and highlighting the systemic issues at play. She spoke not only as a victim, but as a leader, emphasizing the movement's goals of accountability, reform, and community safety. Social media became an essential tool. The Cole Initiative's pages regularly posted updates, educational content, and personal testimonials from other survivors and advocates. These posts helped galvanize support and maintained visibility for the movement's activities. Followers were encouraged to share their own stories, creating a growing archive of voices united against injustice. The team also monitored online misinformation closely, responding swiftly to false claims. This proactive approach prevented harmful narratives from gaining traction and reassured supporters that the movement was transparent and credible. Vanessa's public statements were marked by calmness and measured resolve, disarming critics while energizing allies. Unexpected alliances began to emerge as the movement gained broader recognition. Religious leaders, educators, business owners, and even some members of law enforcement stepped forward in support. Their voices broadened the coalition, demonstrating that the fight for justice transcended traditional divides and was embraced by diverse segments of the community. Renewed rallies and community forums filled Savannah's streets with chants, signs, and determined faces. These gatherings were peaceful but resolute, a testament to the city's demand for lasting change. Vanessa's presence at these events was both inspirational and grounding, reminding attendees that the fight was both personal and collective. Through every challenge, the solidarity within the movement strengthened. The collective energy transformed fear and frustration into purpose and hope. Vanessa's leadership was vital, but it was the unwavering spirit of the community that ensured the battle would continue, no matter the obstacles. The fight was far from over, but with a united front and strategic communication, the Cole Initiative and its supporters were ready for whatever resistance lay ahead. Vanessa understood that controlling the story was not about managing perception, it was about shaping reality, ensuring that the truth could no longer be ignored. Vanessa Cole's story exploded beyond the borders of Savannah almost overnight. The harrowing footage of her assault, combined with her unwavering dignity, captured the nation's attention. She quickly became a symbol, not just of the specific injustice she faced, but of a much broader struggle confronting Black women and marginalized communities throughout America. Invitations came flooding in. Forums, conferences, major media outlets, and activist gatherings all wanted Vanessa's voice, her insight, her courage. Her first major appearance was at a prestigious national civil rights conference. The room was packed with advocates, policymakers, and journalists eager to hear her firsthand account. As Vanessa stepped up to the podium, the atmosphere shifted, the room hushed, sensing the gravity of what was to come. Her presence was both commanding and vulnerable. She was not only a CEO of a cutting-edge defense tech company, but also a woman who had faced the raw edge of systemic racism. She spoke with a calm strength that belied the storm she had weathered. Vanessa recounted the moment she was stopped and humiliated, describing not just the facts, but the deep emotional scars left behind. Yet her story was also one of resilience, how she refused to be silenced or diminished. She framed her experience within the context of systemic issues, urging the audience to see her story as a call to action against the entrenched racial biases that persist in law enforcement. And beyond, her words struck a chord. Tears shimmered in the eyes of some listeners, while others nodded in solemn agreement. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her bravery, it was a collective recognition that Vanessa's story represented many untold voices, waiting to be heard. Media attention intensified as she appeared on national news programs, podcasts, and online platforms. Vanessa's articulate and thoughtful discussions dismantled stereotypes and clarified the complexities of racial injustice. Her ability to merge personal testimony with policy insight made her an invaluable spokesman. She was invited to panels alongside activists, legal experts, and lawmakers, expanding the conversation on racial profiling and police reform. Behind the scenes, Vanessa's team worked tirelessly to prepare her for this newfound public role. They crafted messaging that balanced raw emotion with professional rigor, ensuring her story remained powerful and focused. The emotional toll was heavy. Living trauma under public scrutiny is never easy, but Vanessa understood the stakes were too high to retreat. Her security was tightened as threats against her escalated, a chilling reminder of how threatened some felt by her rising influence. Yet Vanessa stood firm, motivated by the knowledge that her courage had already inspired countless others to speak out. Every speech, interview, and panel was an opportunity to amplify the movement she embodied. Vanessa consistently reminded audiences that justice was a collective responsibility and that the fight was far from over. Her voice became a beacon of hope and a call to arms, urging unity and relentless advocacy. Vanessa's role rapidly evolved from advocate to policy influencer. Her unique blend of personal experience and professional stature made her a key advisor in federal circles. Legislators drafting police reform bills sought her insight, recognizing that meaningful change required more than statistics. It required stories and leadership like hers. Her first congressional testimony was a defining moment. Facing a panel of senators and representatives, Vanessa shared her account with clarity and conviction. She detailed the incident, its aftermath, and the systemic problems it exposed. More importantly, she articulated precise reforms needed: independent oversight entities, mandatory body cameras with strict usage policies, transparent complaint systems, and comprehensive anti-bias training for officers. The room was a mixture of sympathy, skepticism, and challenge. Vanessa's testimony cut through political posturing, emphasizing that reform was necessary for community trusts and effective policing alike. She stressed that these measures were not anti-police, but pro-justice aimed at healing divisions and protecting all citizens. Behind closed doors, Vanessa collaborated with civil rights groups, legal experts, and policy advisors. Together, they shaped legislation designed to root out systemic failures. She highlighted the importance of community involvement in oversight and training programs tailored to the realities of racial dynamics in policing. However, the legislative battle was arduous. Police unions launched fierce campaigns opposing many reforms, framing them as attacks on law enforcement morale and effectiveness. Political figures, wary of alienating key constituencies, hesitated or watered down proposals. Vanessa and her allies countered with compelling data and heartfelt testimonials, highlighting the devastating human cost. Public pressure mounted as Vanessa's national platform grew. Her advocacy sparked grassroots movements, demanding lawmakers act decisively. Town halls were flooded with voices calling for transparency and accountability. The momentum extended beyond federal halls, as state legislatures and city councils introduced and debated similar reforms, drawing from Vanessa's work and example. Though progress was slow and contested, tangible changes began. Laws mandating oversight, transparency, and cultural competency training passed in multiple jurisdictions. Vanessa remained vigilant, understanding that legal victories were only part of the journey. The cultural and institutional shifts were equally critical. Her work demonstrated the power of lived experience in shaping policy. Vanessa's leadership illuminated the path from personal trauma to systemic transformation, proving that change was possible when courage met strategy. From the ashes of Vanessa Cole's personal ordeal, a powerful movement began to take shape. The Cole Initiative, originally conceived as a legal aid network in Savannah, rapidly grew into a beacon of hope for communities far beyond the city's borders. What had started as a local response to systemic injustice now sparked a nationwide ripple effect, uniting people under a shared cause of accountability, justice, and reform. Vanessa's vision was clear from the outset. No one should face police abuse or systemic discrimination alone. The initiative provided free legal representation to survivors of police misconduct, helping victims navigate the complex, often intimidating legal system. For many, the initiative was the first real opportunity to fight back, offering not only legal aid, but also emotional support and community connection. As word spread, new chapters emerged across multiple states, each one fueled by the stories and struggles unique to their regions. From urban centers to small towns, activists, lawyers, and local leaders came together, embracing Vanessa's blueprint while tailoring their approach to their own communities. The initiative wasn't just a legal network, it became a movement for empowerment, educating people about their rights, fostering civic engagement, and building coalitions between residents, law enforcement reformers, and policymakers. Parallel to its legal work, the Cole Initiative launched comprehensive training programs for law enforcement agencies. These programs were developed with care, involving civil rights advocates, mental health professionals, and community representatives. Their goal was to address racial bias and cultural misunderstandings head-on, equipping officers with tools for empathy, de-escalation, and respect for the dignity of all citizens. These training sessions were a critical component of the initiative's strategy. Vanessa understood that true systemic change required transforming the culture within police departments, not just punishing misconduct after it happened, but preventing it altogether. Early feedback from participating departments was cautiously optimistic. Some officers expressed a new awareness of implicit biases they hadn't recognized before. Others felt challenged but committed to learning. The initiative's approach was neither punitive nor confrontational. It sought partnership and honest reflection. Vanessa's role extended beyond that of founder and spokesperson. She became a mentor to a new generation of attorneys, activists, and community organizers. Young people inspired by her resilience and leadership looked to her for guidance. She held workshops, gave talks, and met one-on-one with emerging advocates, sharing lessons learned from her journey and encouraging them to carry the torch forward. The true impact of the Cole Initiative was best seen through the stories of those it served. Survivors who had once felt powerless now stood tall, their voices amplified through legal victories and community support. Families who lost loved ones to police violence found solace and justice. Neighborhoods once gripped by fear began to rebuild trust and solidarity. Every court win, every training session, every community meeting was a step toward healing wounds that had been festering for generations. Despite the many successes, Vanessa remained grounded in the reality that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was long and winding, fraught with setbacks and resistance. Yet the initiative's growth offered hope, a sign that communities across the country were awakening to the need for systemic transformation. The collective determination of activists, lawyers, victims, and allies created a force too powerful to ignore. Through it all, Vanessa carried the weight of responsibility with humility and strength. She understood that leadership was not about personal glory, but about service, about elevating others and creating pathways for lasting change. The Cole Initiative became a legacy, a living testament to what could be achieved when courage met community. In quiet moments, Vanessa often reflected on how far the movement had come, from a single act of defiance in a Savannah park to a nationwide campaign reshaping the conversation about race, policing, and justice. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with every story of hope and every life touched, the path grew clearer. This was the power of one woman's voice amplified by many. This was the promise of the Cole Initiative, a future where justice was not a privilege, but a right, and where communities reclaimed the power to protect and uplift their own. Vanessa returned to the same worn wooden bench in Forsyth Park, where everything had started. The oak trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with Spanish moss, casting dappled shadows on the cobblestones. It was a serene spot, yet it held memories charged with both pain and triumph. She sat quietly for a long moment, her eyes tracing the familiar skyline and the gentle bustle of the city. The place that had once felt like the backdrop to a nightmare now symbolized the beginning of something far greater. It was where a single act of courage had sparked a movement no one could have predicted. Vanessa's mind drifted back to that afternoon, the sharp sting of injustice, the crowd's roar, the sting of humiliation. But more than that, she thought about the strength it had taken to stand her ground and the strength the community had shown in standing with her. Together, they had transformed a personal wound into a rallying cry for justice. The movement had grown beyond Savannah. What had started as a local fight against a single abusive officer had blossomed into a national campaign. The Cole Initiative was now a lifeline for thousands, a symbol of resilience and hope. She reflected on her own journey, not just the public battles, but the personal growth that came from standing up when silence seemed easier. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm her had been replaced by a purpose. Every late-night planning session, every court appearance, every public speech had forged a deeper understanding of leadership and sacrifice. Despite victories, Vanessa knew the work was far from over. The path ahead was long, filled with obstacles and resistance. But sitting there, breathing in the quiet strength of the park, she felt renewed. This was a new beginning, not just for her, but for every person who had dared to dream of a better future. She stood, smoothing her jacket, ready to continue the fight. The bench had been a witness to history, and now it was a symbol of hope for what was still to come. In the weeks following the public outcry and the beginnings of real change, Vanessa made it a personal mission to reach out to the young leaders who had been inspired by her story. These were activists, lawyers, community organizers, individuals who had already been working tirelessly in their own neighborhoods, but who now found renewed energy and purpose in the movement Vanessa had sparked. She met with them in various settings, in small conference rooms cluttered with papers and laptops, at neighborhood centers filled with hopeful faces, and even over coffee at local cafes where conversations flowed freely. Each meeting was a chance not only to share her story, but also to listen deeply to theirs. Vanessa saw herself reflected in these young leaders, their passion, their frustration, and their hunger for justice. Passing the torch was not merely symbolic. It was an act of solidarity and an investment in the future. She understood deeply that the movement's endurance would depend on nurturing these voices, empowering them to carry forward the work with fresh perspectives and relentless determination. During one meeting, Vanessa recalled the many battles she had fought, moments of exhaustion, self-doubt, and isolation, but she also emphasized the strength found in community. Leadership, she told them, is not about being the loudest or the most visible. It's about showing up, day after day, with courage and compassion. It's about lifting others as you climb. The young leaders responded with enthusiasm and ideas. They spoke of innovative approaches to community engagement, the importance of mental health resources for survivors of abuse, and ways to involve schools and faith groups in the conversation. Together they brainstormed, expanding the Cole Initiative's program to include legal clinics, youth leadership training, and restorative justice workshops. Vanessa mentored them patiently, encouraging them to build coalitions across different communities and to be inclusive in their activism. She stressed that real change required patience, resilience, and the willingness to navigate setbacks without losing sight of the goal. Over time, Vanessa watched these leaders grow more confident and organized. She was proud to see them initiate campaigns, speak at city council meetings, and mobilize grassroots efforts that extended beyond Savannah. Their voices, once tentative, now commanded attention and respect. Passing the torch wasn't the end of Vanessa's role, but rather a transformation of it. She was no longer just a solitary figure fighting alone. She was part of a collective movement that was stronger, more diverse, and ready to challenge systemic injustice at every turn. With every young leader she mentored, Vanessa planted a seed of hope. Hope that the fight for justice would outlast any one individual and flourish into a lasting legacy. The movement was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the many who were ready to carry it forward with passion, intelligence, and unwavering commitment. On a bright, crisp morning in Savannah, Vanessa stood on a stage set up in the heart of the city's historic district. The crowd before her was a sea of faces, young and old, black, white, and all shades in between, gathered not just to witness history, but to become part of it. The energy was palpable, a mix of solemnity and celebration. Vanessa's eyes scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces from rallies, volunteers from the Cole Initiative, and people whose lives had been touched by the movement. It was a testament to how far they had come and a reminder of the work still ahead. When she spoke, her voice was steady but charged with urgency. "We have come a long way. she said. But the fight is far from over. Change doesn't happen overnight, and justice requires vigilance. It requires each of us to stand up, speak out, and hold power accountable every single day. She reminded them that the movement was not about a single story or a single city, but about a shared struggle for dignity and equality. This is about us, Vanessa continued, about our communities, our families, and the future we want to build together. Vanessa called for continued activism and collective action. She emphasized the power that comes when people unite across differences to demand accountability and reform. Our voices, our votes, our presence, these are the tools that will break down walls of injustice. As she spoke, the camera panned to scenes from across the country. Peaceful marches, community meetings filled with earnest discussion, workshops teaching de-escalation and bias training, and quiet moments where survivors found solace in shared stories. Vanessa's message was both a rallying cry and a hopeful vision. She acknowledged the pain and setbacks, but insisted on resilience. We are not defined by the obstacles we face, but by the strength we show in overcoming them. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the streets. Vanessa's presence, once a symbol of suffering, had become a beacon of hope and determination. The video closed on scenes of communities coming together, children laughing beneath sprawling trees, activists sharing meals after a long day, faith leaders praying for peace and justice, and families holding hands as they walked toward a brighter future. Vanessa's voiceover left viewers with a final, stirring thought. Justice is not a destination, but a journey, and this journey belongs to all of us. Together, we will keep moving forward. Together, we will build a future worthy of our dreams. Her journey, once rooted in personal pain, had transformed into a collective movement that inspired change far beyond Savannah's historic streets. This was not the end, it was a new beginning, one filled with promise, resilience, and the unyielding hope that justice could prevail.